Very good afternoon. And of course, I must thank Banshi for this invitation and of course, make you at the end of my talk interested enough to be interested to learn a little bit more about anemia than perhaps I will be telling you about. These are my disclosures. And I will be following this sequence of my talk about the causes and significance, what is the relevance, I'll be focusing the major part of my talk on diabetic nephropathy, CKD, what is the importance and the role of erythropoiesis stimulating agents. So the question, why anemia? I'll actually tell you a little bit later as to why Banshi made me talk about, why he's making me particularly talk about it. But it is definitely an important outcome. Twice as likely a diabetic may get anemia as compared to a non-diabetic. There is increased risk of morbidity, mortality. Yes, even a slow progression of the macrovascular complications, including retinopathy, which was being referred to, non-healing of diabetic foot ulcers. It is also a risk factor for cardiac dysfunction and a reduction in mortality and hospital admissions for CHF. There is increase in exercise tolerance, less fatigue, and an improved quality of life if you treat anemia appropriately. So do we have evidence for that? Yes. So this is a study of just anemia with microvascular complications, cross-sectional study, 305 patients, 1/3 had anemia. It was normocytic, normochromic. Like I said, nephropathy, the most common cause, and all the three, that is neuro, nephro, and retinopathy, had a strong association with anemia. So if that is not enough to talk about anemia, then we had a very, very interesting meeting in relation to anemia CKD, which fascinated, and that was exactly 2 weeks ago in the same hotel, which fascinated Banshi enough to prompt me to give this talk. And mind you, I think this was possibly the last change he made in the program. What else can I tell you about? When it comes to renal disease, anemia develops early in CKD. The risk of coronary artery disease in CVD, we know, is much higher. And if you combine anemia with CKD, the chances of stroke increase. Anemia predicts increase in the left ventricular mass, dilatation, CHF, and depth. So this should be actually the conclusion slide, but this is just to make you wake up and want to know what else I'm going to be talking about. So anemia can wreak havoc in the life of a diabetic. So what definition should we follow? Okay, we have our own ICMR guidelines, so which classify grades of anemia into mild, moderate, severe, and very severe. So this is what we should be following. Now, if we look at all the mechanisms of anemia, I will not be able to talk about all of them. But on the one hand is the reduced production of erythropoietin, and then there are these all-important other contributors. So I will not dwell on the reduced production of erythropoietin because I'll be coming to that in subsequent slides. But in the other contributors, I will be focusing a little bit on most of these topics about reduced red cell survival, hematinic deficiency, reduced iron availability, occult blood loss. Do not forget autoimmune disorders. Other, especially in type 1, celiac disease is a very important association. Then other like rheumatoid arthritis, SLE, the other also autoimmune disorders which are more common in type 1. But remember, hypothyroidism is common to both. Drug therapy. Yes, even ACE inhibitors, ARBs, not only the glitazones, low testosterone levels, and hyperglycemia per se. So if you look at the prevalence of anemia, the upper panel shows you type 1 and the lower panel type 2, almost at par in both men and women. I said even chronic hyperglycemia, what does it do? It leads to hypoxia in the renal interstitium, tubulointerstitial damage, and impaired production of erythropoietin. So inappropriately low erythropoietin levels may lead to an earlier development of anemia. We all know the importance of the correlation. So that is why we don't rely upon HbA1c in our country. We say it's not standardized, and anemia is so very common that again we have a fallacy in the reporting. Okay, a little bit about nutrient deficiencies. Even in diabetes per se, there's a significant fluctuation in the iron stores. Transferrin saturation and ferritin levels are significantly higher, plus they remain increased in nephropathy despite urinary iron loss. So B6, B12, folate deficiencies are all documented with diabetes. So if we just look at the prevalence of iron deficiency, and we have Dr. Hajra Mehtab amongst us, whom Dr. Das was referring to, look at about half the deaths from anemia in the world occur in the South Asian countries, and India accounts for over 80% of deaths due to anemia in South Asia. Tuberculosis, very important to monitor and correct. We know diabetes is a risk factor. The morbidity and mortality perhaps could be attributed in part to anemia. What about the drugs? Metformin. Yes, there is a certain prevalence of B12 deficiency, which is influenced by increasing age, the dose, and the duration. And decrease in these B12 levels may occur as early as 4 months into use of metformin, and there are various reasons attributed to this: alterations in the small bowel motility, competitive inhibition, or inactivation of B12 absorption, alterations in intrinsic factor, and inhibit calcium-dependent absorption of vitamin B12 intrinsic factor complex in the terminal ileum. Thiazolidinediones, we all know about it, a 2 to 3% decrease over 4 to 12 weeks, which is attributed to hemodilution, which occurs because of increase in the plasma volume. There you have it. So the drug of choice for nephropathy, okay, the clear-cut answer, ACE inhibitors or ARBs. We're not going to combine the two, that's for sure. They cause a reversible decrease in hemoglobin in diabetes. I'll come to a little more detail in the next slide, but even losartan, which has been a very popular drug, long-term administration may lower, okay, but even by 1 gram. I'll come to a slide later which tells you that even 1 gram lowering of the hemoglobin can be disastrous in diabetic nephropathy. So the mechanisms, not just suppression of IGF-1, degradation of physiological inhibitors of hematopoiesis, and direct blockade of the pro-erythropoietic effects of angiotensin II on red cell precursors. So there's a lot going on there. And if we have diabetic autonomic neuropathy, which is fortunately not so common, it can cause both anemia directly and decrease in the erythropoietin levels even when the kidney functions have not deteriorated. So that's very important. Heart failure diabetics per se are at greater risk, and decreased heart function along with the decreased renal function, and many people with CHF also have nutritional deficiencies. Now we have to differentiate between functional erythropoietin deficiency. What does this mean? Now in anemia and CKD, the renal erythropoietin production is uncoupled from the hemoglobin concentration. The erythropoietin levels in patients with CKD and anemia, they are inappropriately remain in the normal range instead of increasing exponentially. So this is what I mean by a functional erythropoietin deficiency, which is one of the major contributors to anemia. And the other thing we have to understand is erythropoietin resistance, that is diminished responsiveness of the bone marrow cellular elements, such that this resistance cannot be overcome by an increase in the erythropoietin synthesis. This is seen in diabetes, where renal compensation is impaired. Other causes in a diabetic are systemic inflammation and microvascular damage in the bone marrow, advanced glycosylation end product modification of the erythropoietin receptor. So, okay, now let's come to the major part of the talk, that is diabetic nephropathy. I hope I've got you interested enough so far. Very common. Excessive CV morbidity, mortality, anemia is very common, affects disease outcome, and there are side effects of over-treating. So we have to balance, just like we balance glycemia. It has to be euglycemia, no hypo, no hyper. Similarly, when we are treating, we have to balance the anemia as well. And remember that all kidney disease in diabetes is not attributable to diabetic nephropathy. What happens in nephrotic syndrome? Like you pouring out albumin, so the iron is also poured out along with the non-albumin proteins like transferrin, erythropoietin, leading to deficiency of both. There is evidence for increased transferrin catabolism as well as decrease in erythropoietin production, secretion, and hyporesponsiveness. So as you move on to macroproteinuria, all this sets in. So anemia and diabetes, I've already discussed the prevalence, almost at par, later in men and women. But as CKD advances, you can see that the prevalence of anemia increases tremendously. You can correlate it with the decreasing GFR as well as macroalbuminuria, and you can correlate the diabetes stratified the hemoglobin levels for renal function and iron stores as well. Look at the relationship between the iron stores and the systemic inflammation, which we are measuring by hsCRP. Okay, so let me just summarize what I've said so far. Diabetes, nephropathy, CKD, neuropathy, decrease in the serum erythropoietin levels, hyperglycemia per se, decrease in the serum erythropoietin response, RBC abnormalities leading to decreased RBC survival. But when we move to chronic renal failure, then there are a host of other causes like suppression of erythropoiesis, decreased life cell span, iron deficiency, folate deficiency. Do not forget secondary hyperparathyroidism, oxidative stress, chronic inflammation. And remember, anemia is a high output state. So per se, it leads to progression of renal disease, decreased renal perfusion, decreased filling pressures, heart failure, cardiomyopathy, and myocyte death. So this is the typical vicious circle of CKD anemia, which may precipitate CHF as well as cerebrovessel disease. Now, the severity of renal impairment is beautifully demonstrated here. You can see the gradual decline of GFR in patients who have diabetes along with anemia. And I told you this another very fascinating slide that even 1 gram per deciliter fall in hemoglobin in a patient with CKD can be disastrous. So what do we do about it? Where does iron come in, and where do the erythrocyte stimulating agents come in? Now we know that the RBCs develop in the bone marrow as stem cells and then evolve into erythroblasts. This erythropoietin, 90% comes from the proximal renal tubules. It stimulates the stem cells in the bone marrow. Iron is essential for the latter phase. Now this is where the iron comes in. So the initial stimulation is by erythropoietin, so it's erythropoietin dependent, and the later part is iron dependent. What does the kidney do here? Now the kidney senses hypoxia, that is anemia, and it will increase erythropoietin production, which will act on the E progenitor cells in the bone marrow to produce new red blood cells. And then kidney senses this increased tissue oxygenation and decreases the erythropoietin production. What happens in CKD? In patients with CKD, the kidneys are unable to produce sufficient erythropoietin to stimulate adequate erythropoiesis. Now, when we talk of iron deficiency, I cannot move further until I have clarified what is hepcidin. This is another very interesting hepatic protein that inhibits intestinal iron absorption, and it impairs iron transport from the reticuloendothelial system to the bone marrow. So correction of iron deficiency with either oral or IV iron can reduce the severity of anemia, and untreated iron deficiency is an important cause of hyperresponsiveness to erythropoietin stimulating agents. So there we have it. This is what is happening here: increased hepcidin and decreased hepcidin. So this is a very, very important thing to remember. So I said you have to give iron first before you give erythropoietin stimulating agents. And for adult CKD patients with anemia who are not on iron or erythropoietin stimulating agents, a trial of IV iron, or in CKD patients not on dialysis, you can give a 1 to 3 month trial of oral iron therapy. Now, moving on to the ESAs. The first one to be used was epoetin beta. We have to differentiate between the short-acting and the long-acting erythropoiesis stimulating agents. And remember, there are certain non-hematopoietic actions like cardioprotection, anti-inflammatory properties, neuroprotection, angiogenesis, and renoprotection as well. So when I talk of short-acting, then the time duration that you have to give it in, or the time interval, is 3 times a week, which is a lot of injections if you look at it from that perspective. The only advantage is that they can be given subcutaneously. So like the patient is taking insulin, they may be self-administered. The longer ones may be given once a week or even once a month. Now, what are the optimal hemoglobin levels that you would target? Depending on the population, for adults, young people, children more than 2 years, 10 to 12. For children less than 2 years, between 9.5 and 11.5. I've already shown you even 1 gram fall can be significant. So do not wait until the HbA levels are outside the aspirational range. You can take action when the hemoglobin levels are within half a gram of your range limits. Okay? Depending, of course, you have to believe the hemoglobin levels that you are seeing. When we come to the maintenance therapy, these stimulating agents are not to be used to step up the hemoglobin beyond 11.5 in CKD. Individualization of therapy will be necessary because some patients may have an improved quality of life even beyond 11.5, and if they are willing and prepared to accept the risks. When you come to the dosing, the lowest dose is administered to avoid a blood transfusion, and the target is 10 to 12, decreasing the dose in preference to withholding. So we will not withhold, we will decrease the dose. For CKD 5-stage on hemodialysis and those on hemofiltration or hemodiafiltration, we can give intravenous or subcutaneously. So these are the dosage schedules for those who are interested, and we have to keep the risk and benefit of treating anemia in diabetes with ESA agents in mind. Do I have time?
Yeah, we have time.
Oh, I do. Okay. Now, I'll just finish off by presenting a case. So this is a 60-year-old woman, 10 years diabetic. She's on maintenance hemodialysis, on end-stage renal disease for 2 years. She has uncorrected anemia, easy fatigability, despite being on optimum doses of erythropoietin agent. The HbA1c is deranged. It's obvious she's CKD. The blood glucose values are also deranged. The potassium is normal. Uric acid is normal. Urinary albumin creatinine ratio 2.9. You can see she's still anemic, but her serum ferritin is normal. Now, here the injection erythropoietin was replaced by darbepoetin alpha, that is 40 mcg subcutaneous given twice a month. We can start with once a week, and then you can step it up and stabilize it to once a month. Follow-up visit 8 weeks later. The blood glucose values, of course, the diabetes treatment regime was also changed, but the hemoglobin has improved up to, from 8, it has gone up to 10.3. I would like to conclude by saying that anemia is prevalent in diabetic kidney disease, occurs earlier than is commonly recognized. The benefits of early treatment, I have already given you enough proof for that. And treatment of anemia in diabetes and CKD should begin with optimization of the iron stores and their proven benefits with epoetin and escalating doses of these erythropoietin-stimulating agents should be avoided. With that, I would like to welcome you to 2 meetings. One is the Uttar Pradesh Diabetes Association meeting in Jim Corbett Park on the 10th and 11th of October. And for the first time, Uttar Pradesh will be organizing in Lucknow the National RSSDI on 30th, 31st October and 1st November. So please block your dates for that. Thank you very much.